It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me my fantastic and wonderful co-host and potentially jet-lagged co-host, Andy Grabner. How you doing, Andy?
I'm very good. Actually. I'm actually happy that I'm still very good because as you know, you just said I'm jet-lagged. I'm in India right now. And I just had my first tuk-tuk ride, actually two tuk-tuk rides, like the little... auto rickshaws. Yeah, the auto rickshaws, and they call them just autos. And the way to the restaurant was already really interesting because getting through traffic here in Bangalore, where I am, is challenging, especially at 6-7 o'clock at night. But on the way back, the driver asked me, "Do you want to go slow or fast?" And I said, "Well, I want to go safe, but as fast as you can because I have a podcast." And I've never been as fast through streets in a big city like today, but I've never been as scared. So it was a really interesting experience, but I can assure folks, if you ever make it to India or any other country where they have tuk-tuks or auto rickshaws or autos, as they call them here, these folks are doing this every day. They know what they're doing, even though it looks scary. The guy told me they have 150,000 tuk-tuks active on the roads of Bangalore.
Wow!
Wow!
Now, when you look at when you see those legendary pictures of the intersections in India, is that what you were experiencing during rush hour, or is that different part? That okay? So it was just that,
including cows and dogs and everything else.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Well,
but
I'm glad you're here.
It's really, thank you.
I've heard it's some sort of organized chaos that you can't understand unless you're in it and you know it. Yeah. But it's supposedly very, very safe somehow.
Well, the thing is, it seems like it's resilient, right? The system is resilient, doesn't break down. It's performing well. It's amazing. It's like, man.
What a segue.
Yeah. Andy's the master, everybody. Just remember.
Yeah. And it seems we have a new voice today. It sounds like a much better voice, Brian, than you can produce in your microphone and my crappy built-in microphone.
If I get right on top of it and get the proximity effect, I can get a little bit of that sound too.
Oh, okay.
All you have to do is eat the microphone.
Yes.
But yes, Andy, thank you. Yeah. It is me. I am the new voice.
It is you. You are the new voice. Well, maybe you're taking over our job. It's in the future because you just get very good ratings on everywhere where people are listening to into our podcast. But without further ado, we have a guest, as always, fortunately, that enlightens us on different topics. And today we will definitely hit on the topic of site reliability engineering. But I want to shut up now for a little moment at least. I have a lot of questions.
Please.
But I first want to let our guest introduce himself. Dana, please go ahead.
It's something I know a little bit about. I've maybe picked up a thing or two here. But yeah, thanks, Andy, and thank you, Brian. For what it's worth, Brian, you do sound way better. It's a very nice mic. I'm Dana Harrison. I am a staff site reliability engineer here in Canada with a company called TELUS. We are one of the largest telecom companies in the country. So cell phone, internet, home phone, TV, all of that fun jazz. I started as a site reliability engineer probably in the last, it would have been about 5 years ago at my previous employer, which was one of Canada's largest insurance companies. And I've been working in tech consistently for the last, I just realized it's been like 15 years and suddenly felt somehow quite aged at that. But yeah, it's been 15 years with the last 5 or so in site reliability engineering. It's been a fun journey getting here, I'll tell you that much. But I won't give it all away right now.
Keep talking. The voice is amazing.
Yeah, and all I can say is that I've been working in tech for, I guess, 24 years now, and that wasn't my first job out of college. So talk about
and yet
feeling aged.
Somehow you have more hair than I do.
Yeah, well, I often shave it, but yeah.
It's easier.
But then I'm catching up with you at some point. Yeah? I mean,
Honestly,
I'm working
that's
on it.
about, if I grew my hair out, Andy, that's about what I'd look like. And it just looks, on me, it looks great on you. You look wonderful. You're doing fabulous. On me, it looks awful. So I keep it completely buzzed down just because I like the way it looks better. But it does mean I'm wearing, now this is I guess a Canadian term. It does mean I'm wearing a toque around the house. 5
What is
months
a
of the year.
toque?
A beanie, a little hat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think borrowed from the French or French Canadian.
There you go.
We learned something new again.
Now
It's
you've
amazing.
learned TOQUE if you need to look it up.
There we go.
TOQUE. We learned this word. We learned that there's 150,000 tuk-tuks in Bangalore. Another thing that we learned, well, that we are going to teach the people now, because in my local time, it is 10:43 in the evening. Brian, what is it in your?
It is 11:13 in the morning, my time.
11:13 and Dana.
For me, it's just ticked over. It's now 1:14 p.m. in the afternoon.
It's really strange because
the Eastern time zone.
It's really strange because it seems we're half an hour. I mean, we're not just regular hours apart, but we are hours plus half an hour apart. So I think India and Dana, you mentioned earlier, there's other parts of the world too that have half an hour time zones.
Newfoundland, as far as I know, they may be the only two. There might be other regions, but it's definitely unusual. Newfoundland. So Canada, for those who don't know, has two additional time zones after Eastern. So east of Eastern, so east of Quebec, once you get into New Brunswick, we have Atlantic time, so an hour ahead of me. And then Newfoundland, because it's just that extra little bit further, and they're just a wonderful, beautiful, special province. They get another half hour tacked on top of that.
That can't be too confusing at all. Now, do they do daylight savings or not? And then you have to I can imagine the levels of complexity.
Province is different. I have no idea who does and does not do daylight savings.
But if you have such levels of complexity, right, you need to make sure you can. I'm trying to do a transition here. You need to be able to make sure you can try to understand what complexities they're encountering and get ahead of them, so that you can make sure everything's running smooth, right?
There are always challenges to getting all of your stakeholders on board, whether you're trying to enforce a site reliability practice in a large enterprise or daylight savings across your country and continent. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Hey, let's jump into the topic. And fun fact, or interesting fact, not fun fact, yesterday I spent a couple of hours with some of your, not colleagues, but some of your counterparts at another very big telecom just across the pond in a country that just recently exited the European Union. And I think it's the biggest telecom in that country. And I had about 25 site reliability engineers, platform engineers in the room. We talked about site reliability engineering, platform engineering. And it's interesting that I now have you on the podcast, because we talked a lot about, what does this really mean? How can we make sure that systems stay reliable, resilient? How have things changed over the years? And I would like to actually pass it over to you, because you have a great long history on site reliability engineering. I think you've been a site reliability engineer before I heard about the term site reliability engineer. So can you, first of all, walk us a little bit about your history, your background, where you started, what things have changed, and especially you worked with, and I think it was Manulife, if I look at your LinkedIn post, for 12 years, and now for TELUS. What is it like to be a site reliability engineer in a large organization? Lessons learned, things that work, things that don't work.
Once I figure it out, I'll let you know, and I'll get back to you on this podcast.
Perfect.
Is there
we'll
like
be back in
email?
5 years. Yeah, we'll be back in 5 years with another episode of Pure Performance. Nah.
I think there's a beautiful thing about being a site reliability engineer. And one, it's still a relatively new practice. I mean, Google only wrote the book maybe 10, 12 years ago on what it means to be a site reliability engineer. If I think back on my career and where I started, I think I was an SRE before I knew what being an SRE was or meant, or the full impact of that. You mentioned I was at Manulife for 12 years. Yeah, they hired me right out of school. I got shout out to all of the wonderful people I worked with there, because they gave me a kid who did not complete his degree in physics, but had a light tech background from working at. It was actually Future Shop in Canada. That was the Canadian version of Best Buy. I worked tech there. I got, I had always been curious about tech and getting my hands dirty, and started out at Manulife many years ago as a desktop and server admin. One of my first jobs was to go around to 500 workstations and upgrade the memory in them. I only killed 2, which is a pretty good track record. But through my time and my tenure at Manulife, I was really able to sort of steer my career in the direction I wanted. So it started, I think my journey into SRE in particular started a lot with looking into the concept of toil reduction and automation. It was a lot of here's this, manual process that I see 40 people in my department doing, and it takes them each, 30 minutes a day, and they're doing this every week. But maybe I'll teach myself, because at that time I didn't really code. Maybe I'll teach myself. We were a heavy .NET shop. I learned C#. And I was able to automate some of the tasks that they were doing. And that was a running theme through what I did at Manulife. Even as I moved out of support, I was in a projects team for a bit. I was actually delivering. We were in waterfall. We weren't agile or sprints or anything. I was delivering tasks and delivering code into our environments. From there, I went into more of a consulting role. And that theme of trying to automate and reduce toil and reduce manual effort and just increase the value we're getting out of our team members and our applications in turn was something that a concept I had really latched onto throughout. But it wasn't until I was approached 5 years ago by my then manager at Manulife. And he said, well, hey, we have this new team starting up. It's called Site Reliability Engineering. I had never heard of it. He said, here's some of the stuff we're looking at doing. Would you like to be a part of it? And I went, absolutely. And I think the thing I've learned so far about being an SRE is that it is a different role no matter where you look. And I think a lot of that is just because it is still relatively new. I've interviewed at companies where an SRE is you are literally hands on keyboard doing Terraform, managing your infrastructure all day. And that is what their SREs do. And that is one definition of an SRE, and it's highly dependent on the org. At Manulife, we were effectively a SWAT team of developers and infrastructure and architects who we would, identify these patterns of common incidents, especially P1s, P2s that were occurring throughout the org, go in, implement observability tooling, identify what the heck was going on with their application, and then go implement a bunch of fixes. So, we would see issues with a website where we were like, well, why is this website taking 8 seconds to load? Oh, because it's making 4 repeated calls to the same API. We can consolidate that into one call and cache the response. And we went from 8 seconds to about 250 milliseconds in one shot. There are some really, really cool things we got to do as part of that team. We at one of the other things I got to do at Manulife was stand up a reliability engineering boot camp. So it was this week-long developer hands-on boot camp, which we only got to do in person twice before the pandemic hit. And then we went to complete remote, which was exhausting to do, but we still got a lot of people through. We would get them hands-on with, I'll insert redacted competitor tool name here that we were using there, how to instrument your code, what these metrics mean, what they look like, how you can identify improvements in your app. What does effective logging look like? Because you've got people who are just spitting out millions of lines of logs for no reason or for no discernible reason. They're not using the data or they don't need to use that data. Circuit breaker patterns. How do you set up, service level indicators, objectives, and agreements? How do you set up an error budget? And then at the end of that 1 week course, can you tell I really loved doing this course? At the end of this 1 week course, we would give them an app that we had stood up, and using the things that they had learned through the past 4 days, we gave them this app and then told them to perform a bunch of tasks on it. So go instrument it, go set up dashboards, go set up alerting. And then once they got through that, we would actually break their app in the back end and say, go fix it. And they had to identify any one of the 10 things or so that we had done to their app. So we would like shut off a vendor API, like this third-party API that they had no access to. We would instead of loading up 50 records from a database at a time, we load up 50 or 500,000 of them at a time, and so their load times would go off the rails. That was a really fun and I think very important exercise in that particular organization. Because it really did a great job of getting the knowledge and skills and tools that we had developed into the hands of the developers directly. It became a grassroots initiative at Manulife. Instead of sort of trying to force our way down through management and then talking to the developers, it became, here, we're just going to give this all to the developers. And then they were the ones who were excited to use it. They were the ones who were really jazzed about all of this cool information they could get because of what we did as an SRE team.
I got a quick... I took so many notes. Brian, hopefully you didn't hear me typing, because I know today I'm not using my perfect microphone. First of all, thank you so much for that great idea of doing a boot camp. You call it a boot camp or masterclass, whatever you want to call it, but it's really amazing to put people through this. Now, let me ask one question, because I always get the question from folks that I interact with. We need to attract developers. We need to figure out how to talk with developers, how to engage them, and it feels like you found a great way. Because as an SRE, you're kind of like in that perfect position where you're helping the organization to understand why things are currently not stable, right? You mentioned earlier you were basically looking into why does it take so long to start up an app, because during startup, like too many things happen and we can optimize this. Why does it break at all? But then you take this knowledge and then you kind of enable, mentor your developers that are actually creating the next generation of apps, so that they from the beginning understand the role of the concept of resiliency, the power of observability. I love the term effective logging, right? Because we had a guild meeting recently, and folks, guild is an internal group within Dynatrace where we meet with customers or Dynatrace users on a regular basis. And I remember that it was Andrea, who is actually an SRE at Dynatrace, and she talked about how we are trying to really standardize what is effective logging within Dynatrace, what is good logs and bad logs, and really enforce standards, because we don't need stuff that is just cluttering our storage and nobody needs it. So I really think that you just gave me the perfect pitch deck, or the perfect pitch for how we need to pitch observability into an organization, and not necessarily starting with the individual developer, but I think the SRE, correct me if I'm wrong, is also not part of kind of platform engineering, because with platform engineering, we try to provide site reliability engineering concepts as best practice or as a self-service, but getting it in there and then going on the wrong side. And I know people cannot see me right now because I'm off camera. We always.
But I can see you, Andy.
You can see me, but the people that are
he's
listening
moving
to
his hands.
Exactly.
We need descriptive video for Andy's hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty cool. So that's obviously on the one side you're making sure that production is stable and you optimize what's running now, but then you're really taking the time, we took the time to educate developers and put them through a boot camp. And I think the boot camp is an awesome idea. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It was one of the most rewarding career experiences I've had. It was exhausting, just in terms of we were running it once a month for a full week. And especially, once we sort of settled into the pandemic and realized this was our reality, the first few months we were like, oh, sure. Okay. We'll run 2 or 3 remote and we'll be back into the office. And then we quickly realized that was going to be how that was going to go. So we ran it for over a year remote. But I think that was the turning point for us in actually being able to scale effectively. Because before that, we were a relatively small team that, as you said, SRE because you have SRE concepts in many other practices. Platform engineering definitely leverages SRE concepts. Development should leverage SRE concepts. Everybody should be an SRE, frankly, and then I can retire and it'll be wonderful. But I think that reaching out to the developers was the key in scaling, because before, having us just come in and be sort of the SWAT team was really effective. Like, we got a lot done, but it wasn't how we could deliver the most value to the organization. It wasn't how we could get sort of our knowledge out. It was too much hand-holding, almost, where we'd go in and fix, and then nobody would ever learn anything. They'd just be like, oh, like, thanks, Wonder Woman, and then we'd fly away on our invisible plane. And then nobody would learn a lesson after that. So getting to that point, and prior to us setting up the 1 week boot camp, I will say Manulife had done a stellar job of setting up a 1 month developer boot camp that I had also taken part of. And there were a number of other 1 week boot camps. Ours was one of several. So the fact that they had this program at all was wonderful, because it got everybody on the same page. And then it enabled us to make other SREs. We turned into an SRE factory, because then you suddenly had people who were coming through this program. And may I, if he's listening, a special shout out to Rohan Shah, who is now like a senior manager of SRE at Bank of Montreal here in Canada, who was one of my students through the reliability engineering boot camp at Manulife, which was a lot of fun. I will say he was my best student, and now that's on the record. And it enabled us, again, to turn into like a self-replicating machine of SREs. We could then take all of our knowledge on all of our concepts and all of the things we were excited about and all of the things we were constantly changing the course material to match. Maybe we could tie this week's course into a recent P1 that happened and say, all right, here's what happened. Let's break it down. We'll run you through it. Here's how we could have avoided that. And then everybody just went out from there. And it solved to me, the major challenge with being a site reliability organization. And it's a challenge that we're still facing here at TELUS, is people don't generally like being told what to do, I think. So if you come in and you're coming in to a P1, everybody's already frazzled, and you're going, oh, well, we can just sort of fix it like this. Yes, it's wonderful. Everybody's happy that the incident is resolved, but not everybody's happy, because sometimes you get a bit of a feeling, in my experience, people seem to feel like you're stepping on their toes a little bit, or you're stealing their thunder. And obviously that's not the goal. We're all part of an organization. We're all getting paid by the same organization. We want to collaborate on this. But I get it. It doesn't always feel like that. I've been in that situation where, like, somebody comes in and fixes our stuff, and it's like, well, now I feel like trash because of that. But the goal is to, again, just be part of this something bigger. And when we are able to get that grassroots excitement started, when we're able to get the developers themselves on board with everything that we're doing, then we don't have to be those people who are coming in and stepping on your toes.
I do just want to quickly shout out, though, because it's been mentioned a few times earlier this week, at least in the United States, but I think pretty much globally, was when the shutdown began 4 years ago. So it's when everything.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
that is
at
wild.
time of the recording, yeah.
Time of recording.
March 14th. Yeah.
Yep. And anyway, it's because it's been brought up so many times. Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh, my daughter was like, I can't believe it was for you. So yeah. Anyway, Andy, you had a thought there. I have a thought too, but Andy, you go with yours first, because I'm sure it's more relevant.
No. It's just you mentioned earlier kind of the different things you were teaching, and I think it's interesting for recap, like how to get observability, effective logging, how to use the data to optimize circuit breaker patterns, setting up SLIs and SLOs. Because people always ask me, so now, what is SRE, right? What are the three things you should do if you are, applying SRE best practices? And if you look back at the boot camp on what you taught, what are the three things that developers definitely got away? What are the top three things that everybody has to have in their mind? And this is the bare minimum of building resilient systems. That would be interesting.
Number one, understand your application. That was a point that we had driven home, that the observability tool we were using was not there to describe to you your entire application. You still have to understand what's going on and what you're dependent on. It might show you a little bit more, but it is not the source of all of the answers on what everything in your code base does. And beyond just the code, what is the purpose of your application? Why does it exist? Where do you fit into the wider flow of, if you are one of 20 APIs being called after somebody clicks something on the front end, why are you there? What are you doing? What service are you offering as part of your code base? I think is probably the first thing I would say. The second is respect the data. Okay, great. You've implemented Dynatrace. You have all of these wonderful data now. We've templated out. You've got business events, and you've got all of your golden signals, and you've got synthetics, and you've got RUM. So what are you going to do with it? Because you can set it up and ignore it, but then you're just paying for it for no reason. And that ties into respect the data and respect your current state. So understand your application, use data, know what your current state is. So at no point, and I've started calling this out in a meeting that we have on Fridays where we go over all of our major incidents. It's a lot of fun. I've started calling out incidents that have I know are instrumented, but have agent or customer as the detection mechanism. I never want to see that again. I should never, ever be relying on an agent or customer to tell me when something is wrong with my application. Those are the big three that I would drive home from. Certainly there are lots of little things. Again, I could say implement circuit breakers. That's just good developer practice. Implement effective logging. Why are you spewing out a JSON object with every line of the JSON object on a separate log line? I've seen that. Great. Okay, so you've just now spit out 800 log lines for one request or response. Why? Why have you done this to me?
I love the taking a lot of notes here, and especially the third point, what you just said. You don't want to end up in a situation where some external party, whether it's an agent or a customer, is telling you that the system is down, so that you actually need to think about how can you detect if the system is not in a healthy state before it impacts your end user. That's really in the end what it's all about. And as you said, there's different ways to then mitigate. Well, first of all, there's ways to detect it, and then there's different technical things to mitigate things, like the circuit breaker concept, retries, and things like this. These are things to make a system more resilient based on architectural patterns. But first of all, knowing where could things end up being a problem for your consumer, and then how do you detect this? How can you mitigate it from the architectural perspective? Yep. Because there's many things we can do other than restarting or scaling up or scaling down.
Every time I see an incident where somebody says, we fixed it by restarting, a part of me dies a little inside.
Yeah.
I was talking with a developer about this the other day and asked, why did a restart fix it? I get that a restart fixes it, but why did you need to restart it? Mm-hmm. Did you have a memory leak? Is there a condition in which it just panicked and didn't know what to do? Restart may be the thing that gets you back up and running, but it's almost never just the resolution, the final resolution to fix things up.
It's not
in
a
your
fix.
Solution. It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
I have seen decades old servers that just had a regular reboot set up nightly. Because they're like, oh, if we don't do that, then the application crashes. No, what? No, that's not a fix.
That reminds me of IIS app pools where they had the setting to recycle it.
These were IIS servers. I told you I started off as a .NET guy, Andy. That was that's a throwback.
Wasn't that standard? Every 24 hours it would recycle.
It's the default setting.
That was, Is that still going on? Not that we have to go into that.
Who knows? What I can't. I haven't touched IIS in years at this point. Good riddance. Love you, Microsoft, but not that.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, I mean, so this is stuff that you did in your previous job, and
Yeah.
this was years ago. What has happened? What has changed now? Has anything changed? Especially, as you're moving, I assume you're also moving towards cloud native technology. Kubernetes is a big thing.
You want to get
Maybe,
a little bit more current, do you, Andy? I guess I can
yeah,
understand
no, it's
that.
always good to have a little bit of history, right? But on the
Yeah.
other side,
So
we wanna
yeah,
see what's
for
happening.
sure.
Yeah.
So for a little bit more background, I was brought on to TELUS to migrate us into Dynatrace SaaS 2 years ago from unnamed competitor observability tool here. And now we are just actually, as of this week of recording, as of last night, have just completed our Dynatrace managed to SaaS migration project. Now, darn you, Dynatrace, because that SaaS migration tool you threw out at the end of January would have been really flippin' handy for us. But that's neither here nor there. We got it done without it. Yeah, so we've actually had a Dynatrace managed instance for the last 12 years. So getting all of that stuff into SaaS, that's been the big thing over the past couple of months was just getting all of that config. And yeah, I have to laugh because we're definitely in the process of going cloud native. One of the things about TELUS Digital that they sort of when they were their own arm of the organization did so well was that everything started off cloud native. It was completely greenfield, which I mean was wonderful then, but how much of that is deprecated now? And greenfield always turns brown eventually. But on the side of the rest of TELUS, there are, I would say, the majority of what we are monitoring and supporting right now is still like, if not VMs in a cloud provider, then actual physical hosts or on-prem VMs. We still have hundreds of these, thousands of them, and it's a constant struggle. We've had instances where like, oh, we'll just roll out like a one agent update, and oh no, this is now broken. It's injected RUM on this legacy WebLogic 10.3 platform, and it's blown it up. And we have to work through the challenges of that. And that's to be clear, not blaming the tool, blaming the legacy architecture that we're still using. But we are slowly but surely marching towards a completely, cloud native setup. We have a number of Kubernetes clusters that we're monitoring completely in full stack, which is very exciting. It's enabled a lot of really cool stuff for us. But most recently, with that migration from managed into SaaS, what the single most exciting thing for me out of that is that we now have people who understand the context of how they relate to one another. Because previously we had, Dynatrace SaaS that was TELUS Digital. That was essentially everything that a user interacts with on the front end. So you load up TELUS.com, you're interacting with things on the TELUS Digital side. If you log into your TELUS account, maybe then you're starting to call back into some of our more legacy hosted APIs. But with those two instances disconnected and a whole bunch of messy proxy stuff in between, nobody really saw or got the trace context of what everybody did with one another. So you'd see on the digital, on the Dynatrace SaaS side, you would see, okay, I click this, I've called all of these great Kubernetes APIs that we developed in the last 6 months because they're wonderful and shiny and new. And then it goes off through our proxy and then it's gone. And then nobody, I won't say nobody cares about where it goes, but you don't see it. So it's sort of like out of sight, out of mind. Which is too real for me as somebody with ADHD. Is out of sight, out of mind. If it's hidden behind a wall or like a cupboard door or something, it's gone. It just functionally does not exist for me. But what we've done now with everybody being in this wonderful unified SaaS instance is I can now see, all right, user clicks something on TELUS.com. Here's the 20 downstream API calls that I'm going to from there. And here's the proxies that you're going through. And here are the databases you're dependent on. And suddenly you have people who have never talked to each other before. We were so siloed that nobody on the what we formerly called Big TELUS, on the Big TELUS side of things, was aware or really had any visibility into what TELUS Digital was calling them for or what they were calling out to. And now suddenly we've unlocked this superpower of unreal traceability. And that'll just get easier as we go more cloud native, because we'll have more stuff that we can actually like reliably instrument.
It's funny because when you mentioned that, and earlier on, you mentioned, I think rule number 1 was understand your app and understand all the pieces of it. Don't rely on your observability tool, but at the same time, your observability tool is also key to understanding. So there's a bit of a chicken and an egg component there, right?
There is for sure, yeah.
But I understand what you mean. Like, don't rely on that for that. You should be knowing as much as you can. This is as it is. It's a tool to help you uncover it, but it's amazing how much it brought that knowledge to you. And the end result is that more people are now talking. Those silos are going away, right? We always, I know for many years now, actually, there's always been the idea of, well, if I'm going to update my API, not only do I have to know, what I'm communicating to downstream, I need to know who my consumers are upstream so that they know that I'm making a change, that I'm not impacting them, and that I need to let them know that I'm making a change, and whether or not I have to be backward compatible for how long, and all that stuff, right? And you can only do that if you have that awareness. So if you're a great organization and everybody knows this stuff, fantastic. If not, you have these tools to help you figure that stuff out, right? Because again, if you're coming in years later, you have no idea what that is. You mentioned that legacy stuff. The reason why I think so many things are dependent on a restart in legacy stuff like that is because who knows it well enough to even I don't want to touch it. We were talking about, and I know I'm rambling here, but we were talking about mainframe recently on a couple of other episodes where it used to be don't even breathe near the mainframe, right? Now things are getting a little bit more modernized and people are starting to take more risks with mainframe. But whenever you have anything legacy, it's oh my gosh, if I touch it and that stops working, we don't know what's going to happen, right?
The issue of a lack of inherited knowledge is real in super legacy stacks, like a lot of the stuff we deal with. You mentioned mainframe. Manulife was on a mainframe. Here's a spoiler alert for you folks. Most financial services and insurance companies you deal with are on mainframes, and there's a good reason, because those things are solid. I mean, you can run Docker on ZOS now. That stuff's crazy. But yeah, one of the things that we're constantly dealing with, and especially at a large org like this, we're tens and tens of thousands of people in TELUS, is with these 10, 15, 20-year-old stacks, you're losing all of that knowledge. As teams are sort of adjusted, moved around, anybody who's dealt with a large enterprise knows that a reorg there's always a new reorganization happening around the corner, and that knowledge just gets lost. So yeah, as you said, the fix becomes, don't release changes. The fix becomes, don't breathe near this or it'll fall over. The fix becomes nobody knows how to log into this. We are just waiting for the day when it explodes and people find out the impact. It's a constant challenge we're working with. I think it's one of the things that observability tooling can help alleviate a little bit. It definitely can't fix it. But if you're at the very least able to get a better understanding of, okay, nobody's touched this host in 3 years. Let's see what it's talking to at the very least. Let's see what the code is doing. It can definitely help, but it is a constant challenge for sure.
Yeah.
I have a couple of more questions, and we're already, it's amazing, 30 something minutes in.
I talk a lot. I know. I'm sorry.
No. You spread a lot of knowledge. That's what it is. Yeah. That's a better way to phrase it.
Diplomat Andy.
And thank you for calling it knowledge and not the usual.
So one question I got today, or maybe it was also yesterday during my meeting with one of the other telecoms from the other country on the other side of the pond, was what is a good approach to SLOs? Meaning, what do you teach your developers, or what do you ask for from application owners in terms of what are really good SLOs? What is too much? What is too little? What is the minimum? And I'm just want to throw this over to you. If you think about an application that you get, what is a good SLO and what is not a good SLO?
So it's funny you say our application owners and developers, and that's the concept of application ownership has been sort of that's a struggle that we're working through. And so a lot of the time they are one and the same. You have developers who are owning an application, but without necessarily understanding the actual business impact of specifying a given service level objective. So that's sort of a whole other challenge. But it's a really fascinating question because I think if you use Dynatrace's baselining technology with Davis, just throw that in there. The concept of a good or bad SLO, I mean, there are lots of things that go into it. You don't want, I think the concept of alert fatigue can really go into the definition of a good or bad SLO. For those who are, I assume everybody knows what alert fatigue is. I'm just not going to go into it. But we have teams who are like, oh, this alert is going off all of the time, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's a bit of a double-edged sword for me. Why can't you do anything about it? And why was that alert set at that threshold to begin with? I think the concept of just setting a good SLO is to have an effective understanding of, there's back to point one from the boot camp. What purpose does your application serve? Who are your consumers? Who are you consuming? And what do you ultimately need to do? You know, if you are only being called a few times an hour and it doesn't actually matter on the front end what your API is doing, maybe you're running completely asynchronously, so it doesn't matter if your API takes 10 seconds to respond. You know, I don't want to see an API that takes 10 seconds to respond, but maybe that's okay for the needs of your application. It's always contextual. It's always all about what does your application need to do to set that SLO, and then start looking at the service level indicators you can use to measure what that application needs to do. So from the business case for your application, if you say we need to be able to sustain 300 users with a reasonable response time. First off, what does reasonable mean? That's up to an application owner to define. You can use things like Google's standard, I think back in 2010, was that a web page should load in like 2 seconds or less. How many web pages do you deal with today that are still loading way, way slower than 2 seconds? Like, and not even, to largest contentful page. Like, you've got websites that like it's a greater than 2 second time to first byte, and you're just sitting there looking at nothing for 2 to 5 seconds. The key to setting a good SLO is really just having that understanding, contextual understanding of what your application needs to be doing. So if you say, all right, we know that on this front end, we need to be able to service 300 users at a time, and they all need to be able to load this web page in, 1.5 seconds. So immediately you know that your indicators are going to be, well, how many people are on the page or on the site right now? And what is my current response time? How quickly am I serving up these pages? And from there, you can say, all right, at what point do we start to worry about this application? SLAs are where you start getting into like, at what point are we legally liable? Or like we have to start, paying back money. But to me, an effective SLO toes that line of when do we start to be worried versus when do we actually need to be running around like the world is falling. And I think that's sort of the key of a good SLO, is how do you define within a given application and your application's needs how early or how late to be notified for anything. And one of the things I really have tried to stress with people in teaching this subject matter in the past is I think a lot of people think of SLOs as a set and forget. It's like you said it once, you're good for ages. No, absolutely not. SLOs can be fluid like the rest of your application. If you suddenly you're making a release that is maybe going to slow down response time, but that is okay still as defined by your application owners and within the bounds of what your application needs to do, then maybe it's okay to loosen those SLOs a little bit. Are you getting over alerted for something over which maybe, again, you have genuinely no control? Maybe you're calling something further downstream. You can maybe loosen those SLOs. In turn, maybe you've now put in a change. You put in caching. You've put in some sort of reduced amount of downstream calls. You've sped up your application otherwise. Maybe you just removed some terrible old logic. And now maybe you can tighten those SLOs. You can say, all right, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard. I think the other part of that to me is that your users start to expect what you deliver. So if you are suddenly starting to deliver an API that was responding in 2 seconds and now responds in 500 milliseconds, you bet your users aren't going back to an API that responds in 2 seconds. Nobody wants that. And I think that can be a bit of a dangerous point when you're playing with it at that level. But I think the real point is it's all contextual. It's all on what your application needs to be doing, and it can change from day to day, or not day to day, but it can change.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask though on the SLO part, right? I hear people debate all the time on where SLO should be set, right? Obviously, your end user is the number one key factor, right? It should be about the objectives and goals of the workflow, the organization, the purpose of the app, right? But let's say you have 20 different APIs, right? 20 different services you're calling. Well, before I even go there, let me take a step back and say good SLOs require good observability. I'm not saying that as a plug for Dynatrace, because I think people fall into the trap of setting an SLO as a monitor threshold as opposed to a real SLO. Like, oh, I want to know when my CPU is over 80%. Well, why? That's got nothing to do with anything.
Is your application still responding well when your CPU is at 80%? Then fine.
Yeah, who cares, right? Care about that but then if you look at these different APIs, right, these teams can see themselves as, this is my application, this section of it, and anybody upstream is my customer, my end user. So do we look at SLOs below the actual end user? Is it appropriate to have SLOs at different API levels or different service levels? I want my service to be up and running this amount of time. I want my response time of my service to be X amount. I want it to be able to even just using those basics, handle 300 concurrent calls at the same time, right? If it's a one-to-one relationship. Or is that going too granular, or does it depend on many other factors, right? Because I think
it depends on a lot of factors. The main thing, and I'm glad you called this out, is what is the customer actually experiencing? Define an SLO that means something. Because you can 10 calls down in your API stack. You could you could say, all right, we're going to track response time and we're going to alert when the response time goes off the rails. But the real point to setting these is, when does it actually become an issue? When do people need to care that you're doing this? Because otherwise you're just generating noise. And in that great example you gave of, okay, we're going to alert when our CPU is over 80. Why? What's the impact of that? Unless you know that CPU goes over 80 and that is a precursor to a known previous incident or something, then okay, maybe that's a valid sort of thing to set. But outside of that, if you are trying to set all of these, granular SLOs on all of your downstream APIs without necessarily taking the time to understand what your end user impact is or what your overall application state is, then you're missing the point. You're missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and I think the issue with that 80% one too is if you know that that's a precursor to something, well, then fix that. Or at least, right? It's like, okay, that's a problem. Well, then what are you doing about it? Or at least
implement regular restarts.
Either exactly, or maybe scaling has to come into it at that point and automate that scaling. Oh, I need to know so I can add a new instance. Well, why are you adding a new instance manually when that's happening? Right. But I think the bigger challenge we face all the time in this, to me, and as you were talking about this, and this goes back to what you said earlier about the adoption of SRE and it's still new. I feel like everyone in IT is always scrambling. Everything is always an emergency. There's never like a normal running state. It's, oh my gosh, this broke, we got to get it fixed. Or hey, there's this new feature, we got to hurry up and get it out, and people have to scramble to get it out. And part of the challenge I see with this SRE adoption is organizations giving people the time and the ability to do this, right? Yep. And again, we see a bunch of different customers all the time. I still put SRE and the things you're talking about not quite in that unicorn phase, because there's more than just like the Google's doing it, but it's still like it's the fancy people doing it, right? It's the people who make $1 billion or more, and I don't mean like literally, but like it's a fancy state to be in. And the people we see day to day are scrambling. They're working in tech stacks that were not chosen for a purpose. They were chosen because we want to move to Kubernetes or we want to be all serverless because it was just a decision. We're going to do SRE, but no one's taking the time to teach them proper SRE. So they're doing weird SLOs and then expecting, well, we need all the support for this stuff. And they're just, really the only word that comes to my mind is a scramble. And one of the questions I was thinking of asking before was, how do we, and I don't know if we have an answer or if this is some big existential question, how do we get it so that people can actually implement these things and take advantage of what there is out there to make all this stuff easier? Right?
That feels like an existential question. And again, maybe that's another, I'll call back in 5 years with the answer if I figure it out. But I think one of the things that I have tried to espouse is that in your regular sprints, because you're right, it doesn't matter if you're purely dev, if you're ops, if you're DevOps, if you're whatever. I've described SRE as being in that wonderful DevOps infinity symbol as like if you imagine like a dumpster that's on fire that's just slowly sort of going around the infinity symbol with you. That's us. That's like, because there's going to be breakpoints at literally every possible point in that cycle. And that's SRE. It is like the truck crashing into the DevOps symbol and just breaking it all to pieces. I think I have tried to say that if people aren't prioritizing reliability in their application, like you've got on purely the dev side, you've got people like, all right, we need to get this new feature out in this sprint. Now the product owner's coming to us and we need to release this in the next 2 weeks. And it's just a constant, like all you're doing is like feature. But at the same time, all you're building up and behind is technical debt and a lack of reliability and a lack of understanding of what your application is doing and why. So for me, if I can convince product owners to be prioritizing reliability and technical debt stories at the same level as they're prioritizing new features, then I've done something right. It's not always that easy because I get like money is the ultimate arbiter here. And, if we can't say, implementing this story in this sprint is going to save you X dollars, as opposed to, hey, if you implement this new feature, you're going to make a cool mill. Can be a bit of a tough sell sometimes. Yeah. Where I think the real benefit comes in is back to when we were doing that boot camp and we were talking with developers, and a lot of the same stuff applies with what we've been doing at TELUS. Get in with the developers and you are golden, because then they can talk to their product owners. They can talk to their business leaders and say, oh, hey, this isn't operating how I want it to operate based on what I've learned through these, this SRE practice. Let's prioritize this. And then it's less about, oh, the site reliability office is telling me I need to go do this or else. It becomes more like an internal ideation. One of the things, and we talked about this at Perform, was putting the tools into the hands of the developers to make this easy. Because like implementing good observability takes time, or it can take time. And getting that understanding. So we are trying desperately to self-serve as much as we can. We have these templates that we're leveraging with Backstage and Monaco. We have some other ones on Terraform from the TELUS Digital side of things. Where essentially people fill out, 8 to 10 fields, like what's your repo, what environment are you targeting, what's your CMDB ID, fill it out, submit, and suddenly there's a PR against your repo, and you've pushed a default set of alerting dashboards, monitoring, etc., to your services in Dynatrace with the click of a button. That is the real power to me, is if you can get your developers on board in a language and in a way that they understand, you're going to realize the biggest possible wins.
Awesome.
Speechless.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Speechless, or Andy's just tired because it's a combination of both. Probably a little bit. It's a little late here, but I wanna actually bring it to a close. But I have one more question for you, because I really love the bootcamp idea and what we are planning. And you've been at Perform. We always have hot days, hands-on training days, and one of the things we've built for Perform was a hands-on training day for platform engineering, and we now brought it to a GitHub repository where in a lightweight version where we built with Backstage and Argo and everything that you can just launch in 5 minutes and it stands up a reference IDP. And we're actually planning to do more of these to really teach people on kind of best practices. And eventually we also want to do maybe some type of certification, like, you're certified in building resilient apps because you're a developer and you learned how you do proper logging, how you do this and this, and how you set proper SLIs and SLOs. So this was just like one of the things we're working on, and I would love to collaborate with you because you have
Hit me up.
obviously. Yeah, I will definitely. Yeah. But my last question is: you mentioned that you did the bootcamp back in your previous job. Have you run bootcamps like this at TELUS as well, or are you planning to?
So it's not something we've had the opportunity to do at that level yet. It is still something I am very much pushing for and would like to do, though. I think it's a tough sell to a lot of leaders, very understandably, to say, I'm going to take a dozen of your developers for a week, and they aren't doing their regular job. So it's building out the value proposition for that is the biggest challenge, because I need to be able to say, look, at the end of this, if you give me 4 cohorts of 10 students each, I know ultimately I'm costing you, like how many tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars because of that. I need to be able to define exactly what wins you're going to get out of that.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, it's something I'd love to do, but yeah, building out the business case for that is probably the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, I took so many notes. I think I can probably write a
novel?
like a novel almost.
A romantic
as a
fiction
summary.
about an SRE romantic fiction.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah. We'll figure something out. Maybe I use my friend ChatGPT to make it even nicer. But no, it's
Authors everywhere love you for saying that, yes.
Maybe you could write a column for the India Times while you're down there.
maybe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, what's on the news today?
Ooh.
Let's see. Privileged to be a part of Uttar Pradesh growth.
Doesn't it
story
say Andy
in India.
Grabner arrives in India today? Isn't that the headline?
No, unfortunately
Okay.
not. Unfortunately, a little bit of Bollywood.
Austrian developer and near-death experience with Tuk Tuk.
Yeah.
Well, you
Nothing
know
exciting.
what? I'm going to plant the seed here publicly, but I think, you talk about this idea, the boot camp and all that, and you're talking about hot days. I think it would be, what do we usually do? A 2-day hot day period It'd be interesting if there was an actual 2-day hot session where it was like a 2-day boot camp on using an observability tool like Dynatrace to set up an SRE practice, but like almost like a scaled version of your week-long practice, if that could be fit into 2 days. So instead of it being like a 4-hour session, it's like this 2-day session you sign up for, Andy.
I cannot tell you how down I am for that. Like, hit me up. Get me a ticket and a flight out to Vegas for Perform 2025, and I am there.
Yeah. I mean, we used to have a week-long, we call it the Autonomous Cloud Lab, where we actually showed people in a week how to monitor a monolithic app, how to modernize the app. And it was like pre-pandemic.
That's very cool.
And then maybe we should resurrect that idea.
Yeah.
May I propose another even smaller one? I didn't touch on this earlier, but for that boot camp that we did, we also had a 1-day product owner version where we were talking about why it was so good. One, for the developers to be learning about this, so it was sort of the sell job on them. But 2, what our business partners and what our product owners could also get out of Dynatrace. It's not just a tool, or observability in general. These practices are not just for SREs. They're not just for developers. You as a product owner can now suddenly have a very easy red-green understanding of what is my application doing. It's a power that they haven't had.
Is my feature adopted as fast as I thought?
Exactly. Yeah. How's my app rollout going? Like these are easy questions to answer now. And hey, if it frees up developers, from answering these questions, then all the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think education is the key with all of this stuff, right? And to do an Andy segue, that's why we have wonderful guests like you on to help our listeners become educated on this stuff. I think it's the most important factor, you know, and people who listen are probably sick of hearing Andy and I talk about how we selfishly run this podcast so we can keep learning. But I think it is the key, right? It is when you think about even the complaints I was talking about before about everyone scrambling, and it's like, how do you get people to do this? If people start understanding the value and the benefits of these things, that's what's going to finally get them to maybe pause and say, all right, maybe I can give up my developers for the week to go to your boot camp, or even just 2 days or anything. Let's start down this path. Let's start getting small wins, you know, and just to remind people, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Start small and get a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And yeah, Andy, I don't know if you had any other questions, or Dana, if you had any last ideas you wanted to get in. Or
I don't think so. I think I am idea'd out. You have drained me of all of the ideas I have, and
I have them all written down.
And I'll do one more close talk into my fancy mic here to give you that public radio kind of voice there.
This is NPR.
All right.
Here
well,
it's CBC.
That's right. Yes. Well, again, then, thank you for everyone for listening, and Dana, really thank you for your time. This is
thanks for having me.
Fantastic.
It's wonderful.
And we hope everybody enjoyed it as much as we did. And we'll talk to you all next time. And Andy, enjoy your time in India. And next time, if you take another tuk-tuk, I would hope you can have enough courage to pull your camera out and get a video of you going through. You
Just
did.
8 minutes of him screaming.
I recorded a video today. I may post it later on social media somewhere.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.